Hey guys, so I was asked to explain how you use the 3D models in Clip Studio Paint, which there's a lot going on when you use them, which means this is probably going to be a very rambly video, but I hope that it's still useful and you have patience with me while I try and explain things. Before I go over the mechanical, how you move things and everything, I want to talk about why and how best to use them, because I think that's far more important than the controls, because you can figure that out by just playing around with them on your own. So there's three reasons I think that you would want to use a 3D model when you're drawing, and those reasons are: one, they are very good at helping you maintain height differences and scale and everything. So let me show you a different page real quick. Over here I have I made a model of Chungi here in like 15 minutes or something like that. It was a very quick model, and then I rigged it and then I brought it in. And the reason I did that was because he is so big, and I struggle so much to get to keep him as big as he should be, right? So I made a model of him, and then I've got Tempest and Callisto here. They have models who are also the right heights because they have their own height difference between them. So this is Tempest, this is Callisto. Callisto is like 180 centimeters tall, which is like 6 foot, I think. And then Tempest is she's 165 centimeters tall, so she's about 5'5". And I want to maintain that height difference between them. So when I've drawn them and I'm like, I'm not sure I got the height difference right, I could bring in the models, I can double check that they are the right heights. So it's very useful for that. And it's particularly useful when doing a really complicated pose like this. So if there's a lot going on and you need to keep track of where like all of the limbs and things are, the models are very, very useful for that. Because you can just kind of have them there and they can show you where things would be roughly. And I think it's important to only treat them as a rough guide, because while the size of the arms won't change, so they're good for figuring out the relative position of things, they get deformed very easily. They're not very realistic. Let me show you this. This is my favorite example. If you have legs and they hanging out like this, like maybe you might have your legs crossed, so you would have your thighs would be like on their sides, yeah? It kind of caves in the ass a little bit there, yeah? And I don't know about you, but my butt does not do that when I sit down. So, you want to be careful. If something looks wrong, it is probably wrong. And you should trust your own instincts on that. And the models, they're not very realistic, so you should trust yourself more than you trust the models, right? I think that's the most important thing. So they're not really there as a substitute for understanding like anatomy or anything like that. You still need to know that, but they can help you figure out where things should be in space, which is useful when you're doing like really complicated shots and things like that. Also, they're very useful for if you can't decide what angle you should do. This panel here, I went back and forth on exactly where I should be putting the camera in this shot. So I brought in a model. Like I've got like a few different versions going on here. But I brought in a model and I rotated around, and then I finally settled on an angle, and then now I've got that panel sorted. So that's another use for them. And then the final use is you can just see it here. There's a I can't draw guns, so I made a gun, and now it's a lot easier for me to draw it at different angles. And I also have a model of her head so that I can fix up her horns when I do things, and I think that's an important thing too. You should be using the models to fix things more so than as like an absolute like this is how it has to be, right? Like you can see that I'm not following the model exactly. I'm using it as a guide to help me create a better image. So yeah, always trust yourself, because your eyes are very good and computers don't have eyes. So yeah, that's why you should use them, to help with scale, to help with fixing things up, and to give you an idea of where things are in space. They're there to help you figure things out more than anything else. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Except you should probably one thing you do want to pay attention to is you don't want to flatten things. So we got three like little circles here, and when they're when they're not touching each other like this, you have no idea which ones are in front, which ones are behind. You don't have any sense of depth here, right? But if I move one of them over the top of the other, you can see that one of them is in front, the other is behind. You've got a sense of depth. But if I move it all the way into the inside of the other one, it doesn't look like they're in front of each other anymore. You've flattened it. It just looks like one shape, like it's a circle with a circle inside of it. Yeah. So if I go back to the models, and I show you where this becomes a problem, is like the most common foreshortening example is someone reaching out to the camera, right? But if you do it like this, where it's basically just that circle overlapping the other circle, yeah? It's flat. You've lost the depth of the image. You need to have that, like, you need to see where each circle is still. You don't want to lose the shapes when you are overlapping things. So you want to make sure that you can still see that there is an arm here. And you want to make sure that it still reads as an arm and a hand and all that sort of stuff. The better example is this bit here. It's not just like the arm and everything. You also want to pay attention to things like the fingers. You want to make sure that every shape reads clearly, right? Like if I grab, gonna give you a little insight into the controls part that I haven't covered yet. If you go into here, there's a pose tab, right? You can control the hands and you can pose the hands. But if I just kind of put the hand here, reaching out, this like default position here, it doesn't read very well. The fingers are very flat. They kind of merge into the shape of the hand, and it doesn't read very clearly. So you need to spend some time figuring out the position of each of the fingers and everything. And then even then I didn't really follow it that closely. You just need to, it's there as a guide. You need to be aware that you're not flattening things. That's really important, because it's very easy to make that mistake, and then you end up with a very dull image, So you want to be careful about that. And yeah, let's talk about the controls, right? You saw me doing a little bit there. So when it comes to posing the models, the thing you need to understand is how the rig itself actually works. So when you look at the model, you don't see any of the joints, but underneath, like inside of it, there are all of these little joints, and the way that they work is there is a root joint here, and you know that one's the root joint because when you move that joint, everything moves with it, right? So that's like the core of the rig. And the reason it works like that is because all of these little like joint chains, they stem outwards from that root joint, which means that if you step forwards one more, like up to the waist here, and you move that one, this one, the hips, is the core, the waist here is the next one up here, and if you move that one, the only joints that you are affecting are the rest of, you keep going forwards through this chain. Let me just show you the directions of the chains. So there's one that goes this way, and then there's these ones which go this way, and then from here we go down. Yeah, that makes sense. So when we move this joint, we are moving all of the joints along this chain along here. If we went all the way up to this shoulder here, we would only be moving the arm because we are only affecting the joints down this way, right? So the way forward kinematics works is every joint that is another step forwards after the joint you're controlling will move with the joint. The other way you can move joints is called inverse kinematics, and that's when it looks like this, and you see these little circles. And each of these circles is a little IK control. And the way that the IK controls works is there's the wrist here, it has been linked up to the shoulder. So when we move the arm up, we are moving the wrist, and then the joints between the wrist and the shoulder are bending. There's only one in this case. So if we were to go with like up here at the clavicle here, right? This has been connected to the core or whatever. I don't know. I don't actually know I don't know what the rig looks like, but I'm assuming it's connected to somewhere down here. And when you move this one, all of these spine joints here, they are the ones which are being moved. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. You can see them all bending, yeah? So there's these two joints have been connected together, and you're moving them with this controller here. And you will notice that when I move these controllers, the other controllers are not moving. So if you want to keep a hand in place, you put the hand in place and you can move everything around it. So that's the inverse kinematics and the forward kinematics. And together, if you combine them, you can pose things however you like. And it might take a little while to figure out when you want to use which one, but if you just practice, you keep posing things, you'll figure out when one thing is useful and when the other thing isn't. And one thing that is helpful to note is that the forward kinematics, the joints have constraints on them, so they only move within vaguely. It's around about what the human body can do, right? So the joints have been constrained to only do natural movements. But if you want to exaggerate things for some reason, you can use the inverse kinematics to break the constraints and go beyond what the model would let you do. So that's worth remembering, because it also means that you can accidentally break joints by, you could accidentally bend the arm backwards when you didn't mean to, or something like that. It's a bit of the point is, one of them has restrictions based on reality, and one of them doesn't. And sometimes you don't want to be constrained by reality, because you're creating something that's not real. So yeah, if you need to push a joint for effect, you might need to switch to IK to do that. Also, real quick, to switch back and forth between the version, like the control set, you just click on it again. So if you're in FK mode, you click on it again, you'll switch to the IK mode, and then you can just click on a joint. Anyway, that's pretty much it for how you control it. I do have some tips for making poses that look natural. When you are posing a character, you don't want them to be symmetrical, because that's kind of, nobody stands perfectly symmetrically. So, kind of make sure that the pose is not symmetrical, and you'll have someone who looks a little bit more like a real person. And then also, you want to pay attention to the weight distribution in the character. So, like right now, the weight from like her upper body it's all being supported by her legs, right? But if I were to, kind of just remove one of the feet from the ground, now the pose is really unbalanced, and she would just kind of fall over, right? Because, there's all this weight on this side of her body, which is not touching the ground, right? So, that is it's a useful thing to bear in mind, because if you're trying to create a dynamic pose which has a sense of movement to it, what you want to do is you want to have that unbalanced weight, because that creates a sense of motion in the pose. And when you are trying to create a stable pose, like someone's sitting there, someone's standing, you want the weight to be balanced and to all resolve to the ground so that they don't fall over, right? And the way that the weight can be resolved doesn't need to be through the legs. You can, a character could be leaning on something, and that would, sorry, wrong control. That would, that would still, the weight would still go there. If I were to lift this leg up, she's still, supported, because she's leaning on something, yeah? So this leg isn't actually contributing to the weight balance of it all. But if if there wasn't something there, if there was, I don't know, there's nothing there to support her, she would fall over. It's all about that, where the weight resolves. It has to hit the ground, basically. So if you are trying to create a stable pose, make sure every part of their body is stabilized. And if you're trying to create a dynamic pose, figure out where you want the character to be moving towards, and that's where the weight should be heading. And if you can't figure out how to pose something right, act it out, and you will be able to feel where your weight is, and it will help you to... You also feel where all your limbs are and everything. It will help you figure out how to pose the character. I think that's really all I have to say. So make sure that the pose reads clearly. Don't rely on the model too much to tell you how to draw things. Just have it show you where things should be, and make sure you don't flatten the image when you are posing the character. And you'll be good. You'll be golden. That's how you use these models. And yeah, good luck.